Welcome to the webinar, Braiding Indigenous Knowledge and Western Science Through Two-Eyed Seeing. For those who don't know me, I'm Laura Schnurr, Director of Community Climate Transitions at Tamarack Institute, and I'm truly honored to be joined today by Elder Albert Marshall, whom I'll introduce in a minute. Before I do, I'd like to invite everyone to share in the chat your name, organization or affiliation, if you have one, the lands you're calling in from, and if you like, what you're hoping to get from today's webinar. So I am not on Turtle Island today. I'm calling in from the UK, but one of the places I call home and where I grew up is the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people in the Gatineau Hills of Western Quebec. The name Gatineau is itself likely originates from the Anishinaabe word for the river, Tenagadino Zibi, a name that speaks to the deep and enduring relationship between the Algonquin people and the waters that run through the place. And growing up in what is now referred to as Chelsea, I was surrounded by the natural beauty of the Gatineau River and the hilly landscape. I was deeply connected to the place, yet so disconnected from the history of that place, and specifically the history of the Indigenous peoples that has stewarded the lands for millennia. And that's something we'll be diving into in today's webinar. Questions around how we can learn and unlearn about the places where we live, work, and play, and broaden our thinking to bring in different perspectives from those we've been taught. We'll be exploring Etuaptmumk, or two-eyed seeing, as a form of braiding Indigenous and Western knowledges and worldviews. And it's worth noting there are several related concepts to two-eyed seeing. For example, Dr. Brian McInnes of Wasausking First Nation has shared a similar concept of Etuaptmumk, or seeing both sides. And these various concepts all fall under the broader category of weaving or braiding knowledges. This is something we explored in a guide last year called Advancing Climate Equity Through Place-Based Collaboration. The guide explores braiding knowledges as one of the big ideas and looks at a story from what is now called Georgian Bay, where groups are putting these ideas into practice and some of the lessons they're learning. So Elder Dr. Albert Marshall and his late wife Merdina introduced us to this concept many years ago, and Elder Marshall continues to be one of the most prominent thinkers, writers, and speakers on the topic. He is from the Moose clan of the Mi'kmaq Nation and lives in Eskasoni in Unama'ki, which is also known as Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. He's a passionate advocate of cross-cultural understandings and healings, and of our responsibilities to care for all creatures, for Mother Earth, and for future generations. Elder Marshall was an inmate at the Shubenacadie Residential School, which had a profound impact on him in his quest to look for ways to live in mutual respect of each other's strengths. Last fall, Elder Marshall and a group of residents that formed the Antigonish Climate Action Hub were selected as recipients of Tamarack's Community Climate Transitions Innovation Fund for a project aimed at bringing Elder Marshall's teachings to students, seniors, and other community members in Antigonish through generative spaces for co-learning. It's a real honor to be joined by Elder Marshall today and to have this conversation. So welcome, Elder Marshall.
Thank you.
I will start by perhaps inviting you to introduce yourself to the audience beyond what I just shared in my introduction.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Albert Marshall, and I am from the Moose clan. And I must say I am not a Canadian, nor am I an Indian, but I am a Mi'kmaq from the Mi'kmaq and Olistikawa territory in the Wabanaki Confederacy. And I do reside in a community called Eskasoni, here in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. It's indeed an honor for me to be asked to share some of our stories, not just where we come from, but where we would like to go. And hopefully, we will all come to some reasonable conclusion. We will all know and recognize of why we are here. And with those 3 points, questions and answered, we will certainly and definitely know of who we are. Because once we know who we are, then you also will know and recognize what our inherent responsibilities are. And those are very clear because those are the gifts that each and every one of us have been given. And for those gifts to be used, mutually respecting the uniquenesses that we each have, and to use those uniquenesses to walk together in this one world, again, appreciating and respecting and empowering each other so that we can fulfill our inherent responsibilities. And those are very clear. Our overarching objective, why we are here, in my humble opinion, is that I have to be very careful of monitoring the outcome of my actions, of ensuring that the impact of my actions will not abrogate or negate or compromise the very essence of life for all. And over and above that, our over a lifetime objective has to be of ensuring that the future generations will be given and have an opportunity of having a better world, much healthier, productive, and learning. Because we use the word 7 generations. 7 generations, of course, it's very difficult to understand outside of the Mi'kmaq context. Because 7 generations to us is 840 years. Why? Because we believe 120 years is a reasonable length of time in which a living memory can exist. And we do realize that long period of time is really forever from the human scale. But we're gauging it on the environment. And from the environmental perspective, that's only a split second of a second. So 2IC has been around for the last 25 and 30 years. 2IC is very simple for the Aboriginal people because it wasn't really that long ago in which we were all hunters and gatherers. And each time we come back from our journeys, we have to spend some time reflecting, not necessarily looking for the integrity of our actions, but rather, how can I envision of improving my actions, fine-tuning my actions, so that next time I could be much more successful. Now, when you bring that down into the community level, again, we can see very quickly if there are injustices, whether they're social or environmental. It is part and parcel of our inherent responsibility to speak up against those injustices. If we don't, then we are failing to exercise our inherent responsibilities, because our inherent responsibility is to be try to the best of our human ability to undertake projects, how we go about sustainability in harmony with nature. And since we humans will make mistakes, we have the mind, and with this mind, individually and collectively, we can come together and mitigate that harm and restore it. So the environment will continuously to provide all the needs that we need to keep functioning: clean air, clean drinking water, and a fertile soil, and a productive environment. So 2IC, in my humble opinion, has to be a fundamental principle as to how we go through life. And I can understand that for some reason, this concept or this consciousness has some difficulties of maybe we're not conveying the right message, that some people are beginning to think that this is an Aboriginal concept or Aboriginal ways of knowing and being. No. The intent of this concept then was, rather than continuously use this concept of this is an Aboriginal ways of being and being unknown. And since then and now and in the future, it's inevitable that we have to coexist. So can we coin a concept in which it will continuously promote unity, love and compassion? And with that embraced, we will do everything in our power to ensure that the ecological integrity of the area will never be compromised. And the integrity of humanity will never be compromised. And we will exercise our inherent responsibilities to speak up and to suggest mitigation and restoration for the harm that was created to our very source of life, or to other relatives, humans as well as non-human relatives. Again, 2IC, I believe, is something that should be able to transcend in all languages as to how do we be mindful of our actions, that our actions will not cause a negative reaction either to humans or to the very source of life in which we all depend upon. So these are the factors, I believe, that we had hoped, and it's happening, in which we will one day soon, we will all be able to say, let's move forward together in this one world and mutually respect the uniquenesses that we bring forth, and to use those uniquenesses so the outcome of our actions will not only benefit this generation, but it will also benefit the future generations. And continuously exercise and motivate ourselves of using love and compassion. Because no matter what difficulties or challenges we may be faced, we know for sure that love and compassion will always prevail. Because some of these things that happen to humanity, I believe, is to test our responsibilities, how we react to those differences or injustices. Because it's just like, if there was no darkness, we would not be able to appreciate light. If there was no love, or if there was no hatred, we wouldn't be able to appreciate love. So this 2IC is something like a baker. A baker, using their innovation, will come up with as many spices as they can possibly can of trying to create something that would be exceptionally delicious. Knowing very well this one spice will not ultimately make a difference. It's only when all these different spices come together and now they create something profound. And I think that's the best analogy I can use on this consciousness or concept of 2IC. Our individual uniquenesses ultimately would not make much difference. It will be only when all our uniquenesses come together, and they will become profound. Thank you.
Thank you, Elder Marshall. What a powerful message. There's so much there I'd love to unpack with you. And I feel like the messages around unity and coexistence and love and compassion are especially resonating with me in these times when I see just how polarized the world is on so many issues, and I see the political context we're grappling with in so many places. That message is really, really powerful. So I appreciate that. And the way you're pushing us to think about 7 generations principle and the future generations and all of the responsibilities that those of us walking this Mother Earth today, walking this planet, that we have for those future generations. So the next question that I want to take us is, you've spoken about how two-eyed seeing or Etuaptmumk has to be done in dialogue. It has to be something that's ongoing and bringing different worldviews together. This is something you just referenced in your introduction, that you've seen it being practiced in some cases. I'm wondering if you might speak more about how practicing these approaches may have looked in different projects or experiences that you've been involved with over the years.
Well, I believe I understand and believe through our languages as Mi'kmaq. It has been reiterated over and over again that unless we see ourselves as having something to contribute, and unless there is an overarching objective within a community or a nation, that unless there is a relationship, then it will be very, very difficult then to be able to weave other knowledges that could very well reinforce our own perspectives. Because we were told over and over again, not what, but what's the fundamental principle of any relationship? And it's very simple. It says, the fundamental principle of any relationship is through the exchange of stories. Because it's through this exchange of stories, we will not only know where you come from, but why you are here. And from that, person can detect then the gift that you bring forth. And those gifts, if and when needed, you always know where it is. So relationship is going to be the fundamental objective. Because without relationships, it will continuously cultivate and generate fear and suspicion. Because fear and suspicion will continuously create divisions. And divisions, people don't seem to have enough energy to think about all the other injustices. They were just thinking about themselves individually. But if we are part and parcel of this family of families in the earth, and the efforts that we put forth will benefit all. And that's the key word, benefit for all. The outcomes of our actions have to benefit not just humanity, but also our non-human relatives, because we solely depend upon them for all our needs. So with that interconnection, with that interdependency in mind, it will constantly reinforce the need of maintaining a good working relationship in which we will constantly seek as to how can we enhance and build on the spirit of collaboration and build on and strengthen our co-learning endeavors, because we have to learn from each other. Because just one time, in your relationship, it's impossible to know everything, but it has to be continuous. Because that continuous relationship will not only empower, but it will strengthen our nation of ensuring that we have done everything in our power of ensuring that the future generation, and what I mean by future generation is not just humanity, but our non-human relatives will also be healthy, safe, and fulfilled.
I think you've touched on something really important there around the fear that's so present in society today and the othering. There's so much of that, of seeing others and approaching others with fear and anxiety, and not listening to those stories and listening to where people have come from, trying to understand maybe why they hold the views that they do. And just before the call, actually, before we got started today, we were having a side conversation that I thought was really interesting about even the language we used, where the word settler came up and you challenged us. Maybe we should use ally as a term, that just to, and I saw that comment as a way of doing less othering, and really bringing people into the conversation, rather than sort of maybe pushing people out in some ways. And I appreciated that. And you just spoke as well about our relationships with all species, and not just thinking about our human relationships that we hold, but those we hold with nature and with non-human beings. And that's something we've spoken about as well in the past, about this need for society to really reconnect with nature. And you've shared that land-based education and training programs is one way to do that. And I wanted to invite you to speak a little more, if you'd like, on that, how we might look at reconnecting with nature, as we've become so sort of separate from it, or many people have.
Well, I believe, again, and I believe in essence that we have to assume that a lot of us have been very much disconnected from nature, and especially us as Aboriginal people. A lot of us have been disconnected from our culture, from our languages, from our ceremonies. Now, and what would be the factor that got us disconnected? I would have to say it's the education system. That the education system has done wonders of preparing people so that they could adequately sustain themselves in this technological era in which we're in. But I believe it has somehow failed to empower us individually to be the best that we could be. And in order for you the best you could be, you have to know who you are, and who you are comes from the language, comes from the ceremonies, comes from the rituals, and comes from this sense of unity that you somehow subconsciously remind yourself daily, I am not the superior being here. I'm just a very small part and parcel of this wonderful creation. But unlike the rest of my non-human relatives, I have a mind, in which that mind can be used negatively or positively, but as well be cognizant. If we cause a negative reaction, it's inherent in our consciousness to at least mitigate and to restore that harm that we have created. For example, in our language, the closest we can come up with this word justice is det baal dimkawi, which if you break it down, it would mean you bring everything back to balance again. If you create harm, det baadum, you make it right again. And the justice has to be on both sides, in which one that has cost or the factor of these injustices have to reconcile within themselves. First of all, not just apologizing, but putting other means in which this apology would not just be on the word itself, because the words can become shallow, but words that come from love and compassion will also become part of us, because we are humans. We're going to make mistakes as well. By constantly reminding myself as a Mi'kmaq man that nature has rights, humans have responsibilities, and I constantly ask for guidance, how to continuously use and improve my ways to guide me in the direction in which the impact of my actions will never be negative. And if they're negative, I will try to mitigate those and restore the harm that's been done. Because without that restoration, then the justice is not going to mean anything. Justice is something in which you just don't, you don't punish, you're not just punish, you don't punish the perpetrator, but you do everything in your power, individually and collectively, for that individual to come on in the right path again. So this is what justice means for us in our language, and I'm sure other Aboriginal languages will have a little different interpretation, but the essence of it would be very much the same.
I really appreciate those perspectives and thinking about when harm is done and injustice, how we can restore balance and restore right relations. And it made me think about how in the past we've also spoken about how racism and notions of superiority and a sort of idea of a hierarchy of knowledge systems can lead to certain perspectives being less heard, and that's potentially or is often a barrier to I'd seen being more universally adopted as an approach. And I wonder if you might speak a little more about some of those barriers that you're seeing and how we might overcome them. So when people are not necessarily open to different views and perspectives and seeking that justice and those right relations that you just spoke to.
Well, first of all, I believe I cannot speak for other cultures or other than my own as a Mi'kmaq culture, and that is it is not my responsibility to say you are wrong and I'm right, or vice versa. But rather, just like the word weaving, in order for this society today can become as one, it's not only to allow, but look at the source of why we got here. And again, I have to target the education system, in which a lot of famous people have said it's the education system that got us into this mess. And paraphrasing, it's going to be our education system that will get us out of it. Meaning that, why isn't it our Aboriginal ways of knowing and being are allowed to be weaved into the Eurocentric system, especially in the field of science? We acknowledge that science is wonderful knowledge, and it has done wonders. But again, science could only deal with facts, and those facts could only be applied on an object. And when you equate that with our natural world as an object, then through time, people's consciousness are changed. That this beautiful creation of ours is very much physical and spiritual, and it's alive. So as we bring forth these Aboriginal perspectives, we can clearly indicate and see that once you bring forth insights in which people will begin to see and understand that this natural, wonderful creation of ours is a subject, and anything and everything that's a subject is alive, in which it needs and requires respect, love, and appreciation. If that's something that could be embedded or ingrained into our consciousness, I believe we wouldn't be in a state in which we're in now. Because everybody, the 41 million people that are in Canada today, majority of the people wouldn't choose to remain silent and in denial of all those injustices. Because I don't know if they realize their injustices are being used against them by reading. We're condoning of something when we are silent. That it's impossible to change the current legislations and policies where they're written. But if the majority voices were to be raised on a certain issue, I believe those policies and those legislations will change to meet the overall objective of what people really feel and want while they are here.
Beautifully said. And I think a lot of folks on the call, myself included, are keen to explore ways and actions that we can take in our communities to speak up against those injustices and promote these principles in different ways, and through our work and through our relationships with others, and through community. And so I wonder if you want to speak to the role that non-Indigenous community members themselves might play, and that's connects with a question we received from an audience member as well, who's wondering about any suggested actions for those who may want to deepen their ability to connect and consider non-human relatives and the land in their work.
Well, I suspect, and I believe, there have been concerted efforts made across this Turtle Island from a lot of Aboriginal sectors of crafting a declaration to to the people in power, provincially and federally and municipally, of allowing our languages and land-based education to become official in all levels of education. One thing we will know for sure is that it will not just reconnect people with nature. And if people were connected with nature, indirectly or directly, we can address our food security, in which we wouldn't be so heavily dependent upon the import goods. Because when you rely on import goods, you become very, very vulnerable. And once you're vulnerable, then you also will feel and dwell on hopelessness. And just think, if we can come up with a barometer of measuring the stress people endure on a daily basis, and how do you mitigate those stresses, I would suspect that instead of medication, if people can go into the natural world, their stress level will go way down. And people now will begin at least to reconnect with nature through technology. And it would also provide an opportunity for the Aboriginal communities across this Turtle Island of not just revitalizing their languages, because in the process of revitalizing our language, our languages are intertwined, interconnected with nature. So you cannot do one without the other. So these two aspects or perspectives have to be used as one. So these are some of the benefits in which I believe the kind of a transformative change that we are all envisioning will begin to unfold, and in which everyone will benefit. But most importantly, the outcome of our actions will benefit the very source of life in which we all depend upon. Because do we need more science to tell us we have actually exhausted the carrying capacity of the system to the rate of extraction. We also exhausted the cleansing capacity of the system with the rate of injections of toxins. And here we have this wonderful knowledge called science. And why are we allowing science to do what it's supposed to do, but also to be used as an arm of destruction? Why can't we transform this knowledge also to be the arm of mitigation and restoration, mitigating and restoring the damages that have been created and done through science? So these are the pleas, I believe, that First Nations are trying to convey. That wouldn't it be expedient if we can agree on one objective in which our outcomes will not only benefit our present population and will not only benefit humanity, but also will benefit the source of life in which we all depend upon. Take water and soil. We know we have laws, we have legislations, we have policies. But I do say and suspect that water, air, and soil has no protection in the human form. And these are the very sources of life in which all life depends upon. So this is where and how, if this consciousness or concept of 2IC will not only be encouraged, but also used and encouraged, in which people again would begin to fine-tune their sense of curiosity. Because it's truly sense of curiosity that would motivate them to be innovative in a good way.
There's so many great invitations that you shared with us for different considerations we might have and different ways we might move through the world. And it connects a little to one of the questions in the chat here that's thinking about that we all have practices for reflecting on our impacts on the world. Lila asks if there are any practices you might share with us that would help us, whether individually or collectively, focus on making our impacts positive, both on the world and all living beings. And you did just share an invitation to spend more time in nature. I think that's one really concrete practice that I'm taking away. I wonder if there are others.
You as an individual have been one of the facilitators of this initiative. I would like to think that if you can somehow request reflections from the audiences we have today, and to submit the reflections by asking them, how can you take this concept of Etuaptmumk to improve your ways of knowing and being, personally and professionally? And if there is any further clarification that will be needed, you as a facilitator can use those reflections to continuously fine-tune the outcomes of your session. So again, is it possible to request from the audience to submit their reflections and ask themselves, how can I use this concept of Etuaptmumk to improve everything I do personally or in my line of work? Because again, this concept is not exclusively culturally based, but it's because we all have two eyes. And wouldn't it be much more expedient if we are confident enough to express our perspectives of improving and enhancing every action we do and every action that's done? Because again, this action in most cases is not meant to question the integrity of an action or a phrase, but rather, how can my perspective improve and enhance the outcome of our objectives? Because as we continuously reflect on our outcomes, we're going to be very, very keen on finding ways to improve them. And I like to use a professional athlete, for example. A professional athlete, he or she is not questioning the game plan of what they're into, but they are actually challenging themselves. How can I continuously, physically, mentally, and spiritually improve my action so the outcome would be much more beneficial for me and for the team or forever? So that's the overall objective, I think, of this 2I theme, is to individually use it to empower us to be able to be openly prepared and allowed to express our perspectives with hopes the outcome will be much more effective than we just one or few perspectives. And no matter what our culture or what our backgrounds are, we can all feel we are one. That every part of us, every part of who we are, it's on the master plan. There'd be no exclusion, no preferences, but rather we will hear and adapt all the perspectives that are prevailing at this point, because we live in a very multinational country in which every race is included: the black race, the red race, the yellow race, and the white race. And again, wouldn't it be so expedient if we can bring forth the best from each race, so that the outcome, the impact of our action, will be one of which we will all benefit, not just for the human, but also for our non-human relatives.
Beautiful. There's so much there around how we can practice greater awareness of our actions, a sort of mindfulness, and focus on doing things with intention, with strong intention, and focusing on those outcomes we're seeking to achieve, and moving collectively towards those, which is something that a lot of our members and learners, all of them, I would say, are really doing in communities, and thinking about ways to work more collaboratively and bring in different voices on issues that matter to them locally. So I really appreciate that invitation for everyone, and that's something that I'll be carrying with me much beyond this conversation today. There's a lot of great activity, Elder Marshall, in the chat and in the Q&A, and a lot of great questions coming in for you. One that's had quite a few votes I'd like to turn to next is just around how I mentioned earlier, the language piece around settler and ally. And there's some, a question here about whether that's how you would unpack that, and if it's suggested that this could cause further harm and maybe be a barrier to two-eyed seeing. So I want to invite you, if you want to share a little more on what you meant by that.
Well, this beautiful creation of ours, we call it the world, isn't it our home? And within that home, we have all these different families living on different parts. And since we have a limited understanding of the overall understanding of this complex system called environment, each geographical area will provide opportunities for people to become intimately knowledgeable and connected to their environment. And since environment is such a complex system, we need an overarching objective. So by constantly engaging people that live on the other rooms of our home, which is our world, and including their perspectives, and as we all know, we're very mobile now. If I go to Middle East, I'm not familiar with that environment. I will need guidance. I will need people that are intimately knowledgeable and connected to that area to guide me and to direct me where I can go, not just to adequately sustain myself, but also to ensure that the impact of my action will not cause negative reactions to the environment in which I'm, because high percentage of our well-being has to be from extracting the gifts from the Creator. And again, by constantly reminding ourselves, we're not the superior being here. We're just a very small part and parcel of it. And that nature has rights and we have responsibilities. And part of our overall objective is, how do we collectively convey this message? That in order for this to come in a full circle, we have to somehow humble ourselves and submit by allowing nature to supersede the laws of man.
So another question that I had that connects actually with a question that's very popular in the Q&A was, I wonder what advice or wisdom you might offer other Indigenous leaders or community members who are either practicing Etuaptmumk or looking to overcome barriers connected to it. And this connects with a question in the chat from someone who says, I'm a Native researcher specialized on soil regeneration, sustainability, and how can we face the Western world who wants to connect with Indigenous people, but thinks that keeping them in control is good enough. So they're not coming at this with a view of taking a two-eyed seeing approach.
Well, the question I believe that has to be asked is that why? Why is there such a reluctance of allowing our ways of knowing and being to be weaved into this overarching system? Because here we can go back many thousands and thousands of years in which our ancestors successfully managed to coexist with this complex system called Mother Earth or environment without them ever compromising the ecological integrity of the area by conducting themselves in such a way that not so that they would adequately sustain themselves, but also ensuring that the future generations will also have better opportunities than the ones that were there when we came upon it. And with that mindset, I think it will bring union. Because union is something that will ultimately achieve the objectives. By separating ourselves or segregating ourselves from the rest of the country or world is we're denying our inherent responsibilities. We're here for a purpose, and that purpose is to enhance the opportunity for our generation and ensuring the impact of our actions will not cause a negative reaction for the well-being of the seventh generation. So that's the ultimate message. And that effort has to be in the spirit of love and compassion. Because without love and compassion, we can be dissuaded. But if we can embrace this concept, that love and compassion will always prevail, no matter what the challenges may be. You cannot fight love. You cannot fight love with hatred. You have to address love with love. You cannot. You cannot help people understand what light is without darkness. You cannot address love without hatred. So these are the things that are meant not to derail us, but to remind us and to strengthen us by teaching us this is not a proper way to go. Why can't I use my two eyes to look at it differently? And by looking at it differently, the outcome will be in which all of us will make sure that our actions will always be in harmony with nature and reminding ourselves daily as humans we're going to make mistakes. And if our actions cause a negative reaction, then we have something that no other relative has, and that's the mind. That mind can be used to help us mitigate those harms or those injustices that they are being created. But overall, I hope, and I believe that's pretty much in all our Aboriginal projections, that one day all of humanity will come together as one.
Wow, what what a place to wrap up this conversation. I wish we could continue, and I can't believe how the hour has flown by, but those that last message around how love and compassion will always prevail is something I really needed today and this year, because it's been a wild year for us, and I think it's not just a passive hope that you're encouraging us to take, but it's an active one of how can we envision that future that we all want, and how do we work towards it. And so I am so grateful, Elder Marshall, for all the wisdom you shared today, for being here with us. This has just been such a gift, for me, and there's so much gratitude coming in the chat. I don't imagine you've been following it the last hour. There's a lot of warm messages coming in and much love. So I'll just close by thanking you once again, thanking the audience for being here today, and reminding everyone that the recording and all the resources that have come in through the chat will be shared in the coming days with you as you've registered, and an invitation to fill the feedback survey if you haven't already. Let us know what you thought of today's webinar and what future topics you'd love to explore. And a reminder to take a look for upcoming webinars. We have so many coming up and would love to see you at others as well. So, miigwech, thank you.